Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to another game of StarCraft 2 Heart of the Swarm. Now yesterday I uploaded a video where basically my opponent got a little bit upset. If you haven't seen that one yet, I would highly recommend you check this one out first. Because normally I wouldn't actually upload this kind of a game, but a lot of you have requested that one and I will leave that as the very first link right below that like button in the description of this video. So today we're gonna take a look at the game where my opponent actually got a little bit upset of, and you know, after which he started messaging me all kinds of angry things. Now honestly, I actually thought it was a pretty decent game. This was the very last placement match that I played. If anyone wondering, I did get a barcode account simply to do some more ranked up lettering, because a lot of people started sniping me on the ladder and just sort of, you know, doing all kinds of dirty things, and I didn't really want to do that. So I figured, why not just get a new account, name it a barcode. So basically it's just a whole line of lines of ice, I believe, or like, I don't know, are these ice or else? I don't know. There's just a line of codes right there, a line of code, and it doesn't really show you what player is really playing against you. But either way, today we're gonna take a look at the very last placement match, and my opponent is, I believe, a high diamond level player. It could also be like a mid diamond, I'm not completely sure. But it's the last placement match, and I thought it was a pretty straightforward game, but it turns out my opponent was not enjoying it nearly as much as I did, because, well, you will see in this game as well, he starts getting a little bit upset. So all in all, this is a pretty straightforward swarm host game, and as many of you all know, I'm not really a big fan of the swarm host in general, but I figured if I really want to start laddering up more and I want to get higher on the ladder and maybe even try and get back to Grandmaster League, I really need to start playing swarm host. Even if I don't like the unit, even if I think like it promotes stationary play and it's just kind of boring, I probably still need to start doing it, because pretty much every Korean professional in the game does it all the time, and it's one of these units that is always good, okay? Most of the time in Zerg vs PROTOSS, you have this moment after which you defend it like a 2-base all-in, or after which your opponent goes for a quick 3rd base, that you're not completely sure what to do, because most of the time you will decide to either go like Mutalisk, or you maybe go for like Hydras or something, but those can all get hard countered, and the thing is with Swarm Hosts is that they can't really get countered at all. If you have a little bit of time to get like 10 Swarm Hosts out, most of the time you are safe and you can go to the very late game, and that is really where Zerg shines versus PROTOSS, because once the Vipers start rolling out and once the Swarm Host count is big enough and maybe even the potential to switch into Brute Lords, it becomes pretty much impossible for PROTOSS players to really win. So, you know, most of the time Swarm Host is like the strongest all-round unit to go for in the middle part of the game after defending a potential all-in. So, you know, I figured why not start playing it a little bit more, and this is actually one of the first games where I'm trying it once again. And I actually make quite a bunch of misplays in this one. I believe he actually manages to pick off quite a bunch of Swarm Hosts in general. I think he picks off like 3 or 4 of them early on in the game, just because of like 2 oracles. I'm not completely sure anymore, but you will see. I make a bunch of misplays either way. So I did open up right there with a hatchery first, do pull the drones out of the gas right now, which I got before getting the spawning pool, and I'm gonna start my zerging speed up just as normal right now. Did go for a hatchery first once again, because most of the Korean dudes are doing that right now, and I'm just sort of giving it a try. Obviously, if my opponent would have gone for like a cannon rush, I would have been in a lot of trouble, but either way, we should be alright right now, because I know that my opponent went for a pretty standard play on his side of the map as well. Now keep in mind, my opponent is definitely not a bad player or anything, okay? Even though he gets a little bit upset, and even though it's only a placement match, my opponent is definitely a high-level player, because, you know, he played it very well. Like, I don't really know why he got this upset anyway, because I would imagine these kind of games happen all the time on the ladder. You know, it just happens. But here we go. Gonna run my first 2 Zerglings straight towards his main base. He doesn't manage to complete the wall off, which is great for me, because that means that I can actually go on. And if you could check it on the production tab right there, he did end up canceling his Stargate. Now it turns out he actually moved it somewhere else. And actually, I actually didn't scout it. I don't even know where I put it in the end. Oh, it was just at the front. Wow, I could have just checked it. I could actually just see it. Wow, I could actually just see it with the Overlord right there, but I never realized that I was up against a against a Stargate. I think I might have clicked on it when I ran by with the Zergling and I saw that it was a gateway, and then he cancelled it and most likely reset it for a Stargate or something like that. But either way, my opponent did decide to switch into the Stargate, and he is going to be able to basically roam the air for the most part of the map, because I don't have anything that can really shoot up besides a couple of queens right now. I did get my 3rd base going right now as well. Gonna get a pretty safe timed Roach Warren. I think it was right around the 6-minute mark or so. And in general, if you aren't 100% sure what a Protoss is going for, I would highly recommend just getting all of the Roach warrants in every single Zerg vs Protoss games between like 6 to 6.5 minutes. Just because most of the time, you know, that is really when they will be necessary. Right around the 7.5 minute mark is when the first Zealots will come to your side of the map and whatnot. And if you have Zergling speed, you can delay it a little bit, but either way, it's just a good time to keep in mind. Just 6 to 6.5 minutes is just a good time to get the Roach warrant out. And here we go. I'm gonna start teching up. Did start my lair right there. Gonna also morph into a what are they called? The Evo chambers right there. And I'm just gonna try and run by once again with a couple of Zerglings. Now, I do end up seeing the Stargate right there before anything really happens. And I do start a couple of the Spore Crawlers just to make sure. Gonna run around here and I notice, okay, there's quite a bunch of gateways up. And there is also... oh, well, there we go, a little bit of aggression. But there's also a robotics facility in production. So now that my opponent is likely not gonna commit too much into this one Oracle or into the Stargate in general. So here's the thing, right? Here's what I was talking about earlier. Right now, I need to make the decision of what kind of a unit I do want to go for. Now, let's say I would go for Mutalisk, right? My opponent will just start chrono boosting out a whole bunch of Phoenixes because he already has the Stargate out anyway. And it will be very difficult for me to get anything done. Now, let's say I would go for something like... Hydralisk or Roach. My opponent already has the robotics facility out as well, which will just deal with the Roaches or the Hydralisk just fine. If I go Hydras, he will go Colossus heavy. If I go Immortal, or if I go Roaches, he's gonna go Immortal heavy. And at that point, also my Roach Hydra army isn't really going to work. Now, I could also decide to go for a really quick tech up, okay? I could go for a really quick Hive and try and do a timing attack with Roach Viper or Roach Hydra Viper, or maybe even Hydra Viper, something like that, which would be a pretty good attack as well, but it's a little bit risky because at that point I basically require that my opponent isn't gonna take a third base and that he's not gonna move across the map for another 5 or so minutes. Instead, what I decide to do is go straight into the infestation pit, which will allow me to make a bunch of swarm hosts, which will just keep me safe all around. And honestly, like, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier. This is like the moment where you need to make the decision what tech you want to go for, and more often than not, the infestation pit into swarm host is gonna be the best way to transition from a lair tech to a hive tech. And that's exactly what I'm doing in this game as well. So I got my first swarm host in production right there. I'm gonna go up to a total of, I believe, like 25 or so in this game, which is honestly quite a lot. But, you know, in the end, it doesn't really matter because most of the time, when you have more swarm hosts, they just become exponentially stronger up until like 25 or so. If you get more than 25, most of the time, it's not as useful. But definitely the first 10 or so, they just become exponentially stronger because, you know, it becomes harder and harder for a Protoss player to pick it off. Now, the nice thing about the swarm host is that they will keep you safe, okay? I can safely take a 4th base and hold any kind of push. And most of the time, if you go for like Roach Hydra, you can't really take the 4th base nearly as easily because you need to be spending all of your resources on getting an army out. Now, because swarm hosts are obviously practically free, you will be able to, well, they're not free, but, you know, the unit that they spawn are obviously free. You know, you will be able to just get a much bigger army out, and that's exactly what I'm trying to achieve right now. Now, I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, there's no 3rd base, and, okay, there is a 3rd base. He did decide to take it, or to take it a little bit on the safer side of things. Pretty late 3rd right there in general by my opponent, but it doesn't really matter all that much. While I got a bunch of idle larvae, or idle drones right there, not really sure why that happened, but I am gonna transition towards a 4th, right around right here. I think I should do that right now. There we go, Lowko. Good job. And I'm gonna, in the meantime, just make more and more swarm hosts and try and push my creep forward. Now, so far, my creep spread and my queen injects and just my general macro has not been as strong, okay? It could have definitely been a bunch stronger, but that's simply for the fact that I hadn't played StarCraft in about a week or so, and this is one of the first games that I played again. So here we go. This is actually the mistake that I was talking about. So my opponent uses the Envision ability, and he just simply picks off a bunch of these things, and I just burrow my swarm host once more, and he picks off a free swarm host right there. Does he even get a second one? I'm not sure, but that's just poor play. You never ever want to do that. That's just silly. You know, that's a lot of gas, a lot of minerals just wasted right there. And honestly, those kind of things really shouldn't happen. But my hive is in production right now. I got my Hydra den done as well, and I'm gonna start making a bunch of Hydralisks right now to deal with the potential of air, and my opponent seems to be moving across the map. So I'm gonna move my swarm host forward a little bit and try and let the locust basically deal the damage that they need to. Meanwhile, my opponent also has a bunch of Void Rays out in the air that he uses to pick off a bunch of creep tumors, making my Swarm Host less useful. But I decided to respond to those with a bunch of Queens as well as a bunch of Hydralisk, which should deal with all of these air units just fine. Now my opponent is moving forward a little bit with the Void Rays, as you can see on the minimap right there, and I did decide to just try and pick them off, and it looks like it's gonna happen just fine. Do manage to get 2 free Void Rays right there, which is just, you know, it's just a pretty big loss right there, because in the later part of the game, you probably wish you would have had those. Now I do start droning up my 4th base pretty aggressively, okay? 14 drones in production tab right now. I already have 77 out, which puts me up to a total of 91 workers. Is that? You should never do math in a YouTube video. Yeah, there we go. 91 workers in total, which is honestly a little bit too much. But in Zerg vs Protoss, when you play this style, normally what the Protoss does to counter it is to make sure that the Zerg player is very immobile. Because most of the time when you go for Swarm Host, you become very, very immobile. And the way to counter that as a Protoss is to just simply put down a bunch of, you know, warp prisms and just warp in on the opponent's side of the map, for example, in my main base. And most of the time my army is so slow that I'm not really able to pick it off nearly as quickly as you usually can with like a Roach Hydra army. So I do need to make a bunch of static defense, which is why I am getting more workers than I ideally should. But I'm trying to delay that for as long as possible because, hey, more workers is always better, right? So far it's 87 Hardfasters, which is a little bit on the higher side of things, but very shortly I will start warping in a bunch more static defense, and this is where my opponent is starting the run-bys. He should really be trying with a Warp Prism in my main base, though. Not really sure why he isn't. And honestly, I should have already had a bunch of static defense ready to potentially deal with this, because imagine like a big warp in right now in my main base. I would be in a lot of trouble. Here we go though, I'm finally getting some static defense right there now that I am maxed out, and I'm also gonna get some static defense at my 4th base to make sure that my opponent can't just run by with a bunch of zealots and kill me that way. I do decide to actually replace them with drones because I will make some static defense again in a little bit. And meanwhile, my Swarm Host, my Locusts are just moving across the map, trying to do as much damage as possible, but mainly just pushing the Protoss army back. Now, the 5th base on this map is always a little bit tricky to take, okay? As you can see, like, you know, if I want to take my 5th base on this side of the map, I'm gonna have to expand towards my opponent. What I should probably do instead is, when my army isn't really doing very much of anything, like right now, I should probably just knock down the rocks and just go towards the bottom right corner of the map. There's all kinds of little misplays that I'm making right here, that I'm simply just pointing out for the fact that, you know, I'm playing nowhere near perfect right here. And my opponent decides to actually just move over towards my base, but my Vipers are here. I do have energy on them, I do have Abduct ready, and I will be able to abduct a bunch of these Colossus if my opponent isn't careful. Now obviously Locusts do a lot of damage. Here we go, 1st Abduct going down, 2nd Abduct going down, 3rd Abduct going down as well, and all of these Colossus are falling. Now this is where, oh, 4th Abduct going down as well. Now this is where Protoss players generally hate the Zerg, okay? Not gonna lie, he just lost he just lost 4 Colossus right there to a bunch of Locusts. And I understand the pain, but honestly, like, you should really be moving across the map more with like run-bys and whatnot. He's not even going for the main base. He's not really been trying any warp prism harassment at all. He's not really aggressively moving towards me either, and he's not trying to jump on top of my Swarm Host, which is usually the one way you will be able to get a victory right now. Now what my opponent is doing in the meantime is stacking up to more and more air units. And that is, wow, he's raging at me. And that is usually the one way you can get back into the game. Because obviously what that means is that, you know, a Zerg player, generally speaking, doesn't really have very much of anything to like kill air units, you know, like Zerg anti-air is kind of poor, except for like the except for like the Spore Crawler and whatnot. So, you know, I do decide to put down a Spire right now just in case, but I do want to move out right now. I don't want to sit back for too much longer, because I know if my opponent manages to get a big air army out, my Swarm Hosts are obviously going to be pretty much useless, and so are my Vipers, and so is really my ground army, so I need to make sure that that does not happen. So I am aggressively moving forward right now. I do have a huge bank as well. I got 6,000 minerals, almost 2,500 gas right there. And in the meantime, my army is pretty much free. Now, once again, bunch of abducts right there on a lot of this army, and I do manage to get a kill on it. Warp Prism being target fired down right there as well. And even though I end up losing a bunch of my army, in the end it doesn't really matter. I do decide to run by with a couple of my Hydras as well, while making sure that my Locusts are moving towards his 4th base. And meanwhile, my Hydras are dealing a bunch of damage right here. Now, if you take a look at them, you can see, like, this is just dealing a lot of damage to my opponent already. And that just means that my opponent just does not have as much income as he would usually have at this point in the game. Now, I believe my opponent gets a little bit more upset in a little bit as well. But, you know, honestly, like, I actually quite like this game. I thought it was a pretty solid game with a bunch of minor mistakes that my opponent could easily fix. Like giving away the 2 Void Rays early on in the game and just generally playing a little bit too passive and also not really worrying about any kind of counterattack right now. For example, at this point in the game, my opponent could be doing all kinds of warp ins in my main base. And even though there's already static defense, it has, you know, pretty much gone uncontested the entirety of the game. And at this point, I will be honest, it's pretty much impossible for a PROTOSS to win, okay? I have my Locust going to town, I got a couple of Roaches going to town as well on his actual supply count, and in the meantime, I have a huge bank. I get 8,500 minerals right now, and 3,500 gas. Like, that's not gonna go anywhere, right? I will be able to just morph a bunch of Brute Lords if I really want to, and in the meantime, I'm just trying to do as much damage as possible. Once again, getting an Abduct right there on a Colossus. The Colossus does end up going down, and even though he manages to clean up a bunch of the Locust, I'm just gonna go back to my side of the map right now, or actually I'm just gonna sit back for a little bit longer and let my Locust do the damage. Now, he's just slowly but surely losing a lot of units, and that's the main thing right here. Like, he's losing a couple of Stalkers, and then a couple of Archons, and then a Colossus get abducted, and I'm just killing him faster than he can remake stuff. And because his mining is gonna be pretty small as well right now, well, he still has 70 Harvesters, he's still getting a bunch of stuff, it's just not gonna allow him to deal very much of anything. Now, I am just trying to sit back for as long as possible, knowing that the longer this goes on, the stronger my position will really be. And for a potential follow-up, I got my Greater Spire already about to be finished up. I should have honestly started a bunch of, what are they called? Corruptors. I should have started those a little bit earlier, so I could potentially morph them into Brute Lords, which would be absolutely amazing. But at this point, you know, like, even though this takes very long, like, this is not a very quick way to win. At this point, my opponent is just already dead. He was pretty much already dead when I started this engagement, but it just takes very long to kill it off eventually. There we go, finally transitioning into a bunch of Corruptors. Just managed to get up to almost 15,000 supply right there, or 15,000 bank right there, and my opponent is making his final stand while not saying GG and leaving the game. So, all in all, this was a pretty decent game, I'll be honest. Like, there wasn't really that many mistakes. It's just like minor things that he should be fixing and that I should be fixing as well. And I think we would have some pretty high-level Zerg versus PROTOSS going on. But either way, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. If you really enjoyed it and you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But whatever you do, make sure you comment down below and let me know in what games you reach. I want to thank you guys all for watching. Have an amazing day. Don't forget to smile, and I'll see you in the next one.